Chapter 7. This is the second mini lecture. We left off looking at flowers or plant organs. So now we're going to look at flowers and how they are important within crop plants. So one of the big things that you really need to understand is that that sexual reproduction starts with those flowers. And so once that growth stage or that development stage happens to where that plant will then start to flower, this is where that sexual reproduction starts to happen, and we'll look at the pollination and all of that as well. These are modified leaves, so they are modified for that sexual reproduction that happens as well. Within those flowers, we have 4 different big parts that we look at and that we examine. We have the sepal, the pistil, the petal, and then the stamen as well. And so I'll show you some pictures of those. And then as that flower grows, we compare it and contrast it as complete or incomplete, or and as perfect and imperfect. And I'll show you some pictures of those. And then we look at how those arrangements are made. And so the arrangements that we look at of those flowers are called inflorescence. The sepal, the ovary, the pistil, the stamen, I added that ovary there, but those are all very important in terms of how we compare and contrast those different types of flowers. So you can see the stamen there on the left-hand part has 2 different ways that stamen is put together there as well. And I'm going to show you some really cool different types of crop flowering plants in class this week that have a lot to do with the stamen and how that will then interact with pollination as well. Then you see the pistil there on the right-hand side. It has a stigma, the style, and the ovary in there. Petal obviously is the pretty thing that we see, that we know that, hey, it's actually growing, it's actually doing what it's supposed to. That's awesome. And then the sepal there, just below all of those on the left-hand side, the bottom left-hand side, the sepal is very important in many different aspects of that growth process, and it's definitely a support for that flower. Little different because this is a grass flower. So we're looking at any type of grass plant that we have almost the same thing, but we look at it and we compare and contrast it a little bit differently. So you have obviously the ovary, we have the florets and the lemma, and then we're going to look at in class how those compare and contrast to different field crops and why they are different, why the monocot versus the dicot it will be different as well. So this is where pollination happens. So you can see the stamen and the stigma. You can see that pollen release right there above there where that pistil would be. And then that ovary is working pretty hard to make sure that all of that is working together. So that's what pollination looks like. That's the yellow material that you would get on your hands if you would touch any of that pollen that's released. Is just an arrangement of flowers. So these are 5 different arrangements of flowers, and you can definitely tell if you were to go buy flowers in a floral shop or a store what kind of examples of those. But here are those 5 really main ones that we see. We see spikes, we see heads, and umbels. These are all different ways to market those flowers as well. But if you're looking at it in a crop term, we're looking at how those will interact with pollination. So there are probably going to be many questions on this, so I just kind of want to really look at it. So what's the difference between a fruit and a seed? So a fruit, make sure you star this, make sure you understand this, is just that ripened or that mature ovary that is just containing the seed or the seeds. Okay, so we look at it as fleshy or dry, and that's how we would classify it if we were going or market it. So again, that fruit is just that mature or that almost ripened ovary that contains those seeds or those seed that that plant would have. Seeds are mature. Okay, so they're not ripened. They're not a mature ovary. They are mature. They are fertilized or they're eggs with an ovary. So we'll look at different fruits versus seeds in class, and we'll be able to actually dissect them, and I'll show you what that really means with hands-on material. Really important when you look at the development of that plant from the start, from the seed. Okay, so this to occur, that dormancy has to be broken, and if it's not broken, obviously that seed will not germinate. So we look at two different types of emergence. We look at hypogeal and epigeal. So hypogeal is when that cotyledon will break open above the surface, and then that epigeal, those cotyledons will remain below the surface. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. But this is important when we look at a lot of research having to do with seeding emergence, because hypogeal and epigeal germination will be different at different times. So very important to decipher those differences. I want to kind of show you just a graphic of epigeal versus hypogeal. So, and when you look at that epigeal, you can see that those cotyledons will remain below the surface like we just talked about. So on the right-hand side, you can see that that plant is starting to emerge, not from the soil, but from that seed on the right-hand side there. It's going to emerge, and then those leaves will start to then grow. But on the left-hand side, you can see that hypogeal and how those cotyledons will break open through after it's broken through the surface. Okay, so those are the two types of germinations that we look at in plant science.